the night the shelter turned them away. Cora Bennett didn't argue. She just took her son's hand and walked back into the cold like it had been waiting for her all along. Theo was 13 and tall for his age, but he was still her boy, and he looked up at her the way he always did when he wanted her to make something impossible into something possible. "Where do we go now, Mom?" "I'm thinking, baby." She wasn't thinking. She was praying, a tired, quiet kind of praying that didn't ask for miracles anymore, just for the next 10 minutes to be survivable. The shelter on Pine Street had been their last option. The next nearest was 40 miles away, and 40 miles was a long way to walk in a Vermont November, and they didn't have the bus fare, and the diner where you could nurse a coffee until dawn was already 3 hours away on foot. She was about to tell Theo they'd have to find a church porch when a man stepped out of a sedan across the street. He didn't belong on Pine Street. His coat was too pressed, his shoes too clean, and he carried a leather folder under one arm the way some men carry weight that has nothing to do with what's inside. "Mrs. Bennett?" She stopped. "That depends who's asking. My name is Wendell Marsh. I'm an attorney." He paused, and she noticed the pause. Most lawyers didn't pause. "I'm here about inheritance." The word landed strangely. Inheritance. As if she were the kind of woman who had things passed down to her. As if anybody in her bloodline had ever owned anything worth passing. From who? Estelle Whitman. The name meant nothing. She told him so. The lawyer slid an envelope from his folder, yellowed at the edges, sealed not with care but with time. Inside was a single brass key, heavy and old, the kind of key that didn't open mailboxes or apartments, the kind of key that opened doors people didn't open anymore. "A property," he said, "left entirely in your name. The Whitman house on Hemlock Ridge." Cora nearly dropped the key. Everyone in the county knew the Whitman house. Children dared each other to walk up to the gate. Realtors had stopped calling about it years ago. It had stood empty for 31 years at the edge of town, like something the world had agreed to forget on purpose. And now, somehow it was hers. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Wendell Marsh waited while she stared at the key. He didn't rush her. That was the first thing Cora noticed about him, and the thing she'd remember later when she tried to understand why she had trusted him in the end. He was a man who knew how to wait. "Mrs. Bennett, I realize this is a lot to take in. There's quite a bit to discuss, but I don't think this sidewalk is the place. Is there somewhere I could drive you and your son? A diner, perhaps?" Cora glanced at Theo. He was standing very still, the way he stood when he was trying not to want something. She knew that stance. She taught it to him, without meaning to. "There's a Howard's on Maple," she said. "Open all night." "Then please, allow me." The car was warm. That was the first thing. Theo slid into the back seat and let out a breath he must have been holding for a long time. Cora kept her duffel between her knees because some habits don't leave you, even when comfort knocks. Especially then. At the diner, Wendell ordered coffee for himself and asked Cora and Theo what they wanted. Cora started to say nothing. Theo started to say nothing. Wendell said, 2 grilled cheeses, 2 cups of soup, and whatever pie you have. When the waitress walked away, he opened his folder. "Mrs. Bennett, forgive me for being direct. The estate of Estelle Whitman is unusual, and I've been instructed to handle the transfer with care. May I ask, did your mother ever speak of her?" Cora's mother had died when Cora was 11. Cora remembered her in fragments. The smell of her hair, a yellow sweater, the way she hummed when she ironed shirts at the kitchen table of the rented duplex they'd share with 3 other families. Her mother had not spoken of relatives. Her mother had not spoken of much. She had been a quiet woman who paid her rent in cash and kept a single photograph in her wallet that Cora had never been allowed to see. "My mother didn't talk about her family," Cora said. "I don't have any people I know of." "You did," Wendell said gently. "On your mother's side, very distantly. Estelle Whitman was your great-aunt by marriage, technically, though that designation is not really accurate to what she was." Cora looked up. "What was she, then?" Wendell folded his hands. "I don't entirely know. That's part of what I'm trying to tell you. Estelle Whitman was a woman, who kept her own counsel for the better part of 70 years. She left detailed instructions in her will, but very few explanations. What I can tell you is this. She wrote her will more than 20 years ago. She named you in it when you were still a young woman. She updated it twice when you moved, and once when your son was born. She had been watching you, Mrs. Bennett, from a distance, for most of your life. Theo's hand, which had been resting on the formica between them, slid over and closed around hers. Cora couldn't speak. I have, as I said, a key, Wendell continued, and the deed. The house has been maintained at minimum levels by a property service for 31 years. Taxes paid, roof patched, the bare necessities. The grounds are overgrown. Inside is, frankly, untouched. There's no mortgage. There are some unpaid utility costs that I'd like to discuss in a moment, but the house, the land, and everything inside it now belong to you and to Theo, free and clear. Cora found her voice. Mr. Marsh, I have to be honest with you. I don't even own a car. I don't have $100 to my name. I can't take care of a house. I can't. I don't know what you think I can do with it. I don't think anything, he said. I'm here to deliver what was left to you. What you do with it is yours to decide. May I tell you what Mrs. Whitman wrote in her instructions to me? Cora nodded. Wendell read from a single index card in his careful voice. Tell her I'm sorry it took this long. Tell her there's a sealed wing on the east side of the house, and the brass key opens the front door. But the second key, the one she'll find when she's ready, opens the rest. Tell her she'll know when she's ready. And tell her I wasn't crazy. Whatever they say in town. I wasn't crazy. Cora stared at the card. That's it. That's it. What's behind the sealed wing? Mrs. Whitman did not say. The property service that maintained the house was specifically instructed never to enter the east wing under any circumstances. Doors were boarded over from the inside. I've never been past them myself. Theo leaned forward. Mom. I know, baby. Mom. I know. She looked at Wendell. When can we go? Tonight, if you wish. I have the keys with me. The house is running water and electricity. Mrs. Whitman insisted those services remain active. There's likely no working heat. But there are fireplaces. It's not what most people would call habitable, but it's standing, and it's yours. Cora thought of the parking lot, the sidewalk, the 40 miles to the next shelter. She thought of Theo's coat, 2 sizes too small. She thought of her mother in the yellow sweater, humming over an ironing board, keeping secrets so heavy they had eventually killed her without anyone noticing. She thought of the words I wasn't crazy, and she said, tonight, the Whitman house didn't appear all at once. It came at them in pieces through the dark. First, the iron gates, leaning slightly inward, one side hanging just open enough to seem like an invitation that had been left unanswered. Then, the long drive, swallowed by weeds and reaching black branches that brushed the roof of Wendell's car as he eased through. Then the trees thinned, and the moonlight reached the ground, and there it stood. It was bigger than Cora had imagined. Not in width. She'd expected width. It was tall, 3 full stories, with a tower on the eastern end that rose another story above the rest, capped with a slate cone that had not lost a single tile in its long abandonment. The stone was dark, the windows tall and narrow, and the porch wrapped around the front like a long, patient arm. It did not look ruined. That was the thing. It looked kept. Wendell stopped the car at the foot of the steps. He left the headlights on. I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Bennett. I haven't been here in almost a decade. I have a duplicate of the front door key and a card with the property service's number and the deed in this folder. I have no desire to enter the house tonight. That's a journey for you and your son to make. I'll wait here for as long as you need me. If you wish to leave, I'll drive you to the diner, no questions. If you wish to stay, I'll come back tomorrow with provisions and check on you. The decision is entirely yours. Cora opened the car door. The November air pressed against her face like cold water. Theo got out beside her, his backpack on one shoulder, his eyes huge. They stood at the foot of the steps for a long time. Mom, Theo said, are you scared? Yes. Me too. That's okay. She climbed the steps. The boards held. Not even a creak. The porch had been swept recently. She could see the marks of a broom and the dust along the corners. Someone had been here, the property service, she supposed. But it had been a careful sweeping, not a perfunctory one. The marks went into the corners. The brass key fit the lock the way a hand fits a glove that's been waiting for it. The deadbolt slid back with a single soft click. The door swung inward on hinges that had been oiled. The smell came first. Not mold, not decay, something else. Old wood, lavender, dry paper, a faint ghost of wood smoke from a fireplace that hadn't been lit in 3 decades. Stillness, but not death. Cora stepped inside, and Theo stepped in behind her, and the door swung gently closed at her back. The entryway was a tall panel hall with a staircase that curved up into shadow. A coat rack stood against one wall. A mirror, draped in a yellowed sheet, hung on the other. A grandfather clock stood silent in a corner. Its hand stopped at 3:42. Its glass face filmed with dust. "Mom," Theo whispered, "why does it feel like someone's home?" "I don't know." She walked slowly through the rooms. A parlor with a piano. The keys covered by a thin runner cloth. A library with shelves that ran floor to ceiling. The books arranged by hand, alphabetical, dusted recently. A dining room with a long table and 12 chairs. The table set for nobody. A single candlestick at the center. A kitchen with a heavy iron stove. Copper pots on hooks. A window over the sink that looked out into a black tangle of garden. Everywhere the same thing. Dust on the surfaces. But the dust was thin. The kind of dust that came back fast in a closed-up house but had been disturbed not long ago. The fireplace in the parlor had been swept clean. Logs were stacked beside it. Matches on the mantel. "Theo," she said, "stay close to me. I'm not going anywhere." They climbed the stairs. The second floor was bedrooms and a long hall with windows looking out over the back lawn. Most of the bedrooms were closed. One was open. Inside it, a single bed had been turned down, the quilt folded back, the pillow plumped as if someone prepared for a guest. There was a small note on the dresser, folded once. Cora picked it up. "Cora, I had this room kept ready for you for many years. There is firewood in the basement. There is canned food in the pantry. The water is from the well, and it is good. Take what you need. Sleep tonight. Tomorrow you may begin to rest. E." She set the note down with a hand that had begun to shake. "Mom," Theo said. "She knew we were coming." "Not tonight," Cora said. "But yes, yes, she knew we were coming." They went back downstairs. Cora lit the fire in the parlor with hands that were no longer entirely steady. She found canned soup in the pantry, exactly as the note had promised. The well water ran clear after a few seconds of brown. There was tea in a tin, and bread that had been wrapped airtight in a freezer in the basement, and butter that Wendell, who had, in fact, come back inside with a paper sack of supplies, had brought from the diner on his way. He left an hour later with a promise to return at noon the next day. Cora and Theo ate by the fire. They did not speak of the East Wing. They did not speak of the woman who had watched Cora from a distance for 30 years and prepared a bed for her in a house she had never been told existed. They ate, and they were warm, and Theo fell asleep first with his cheek against the arm of the sofa, and Cora sat by the fire for a long time after that, watching the shadows move across the high ceiling. There were 2 doors in the parlor. One led back to the entry. The other was on the eastern wall, and it was paneled the same as the rest of the room. But at its center, just at eye height, 2 heavy iron bolts had been driven to the wood and into the doorframe behind it. The bolts had been driven from the parlor side, and they had been driven hard. She sat there until the fire burned low and looked at the bolts and thought, that is the door she meant. The east wing begins there. She did not get up. She did not try the door. The note had said tomorrow. She slept in a chair beside her sleeping son in the warmest room of a house she had inherited from a woman she had never known. And for the first time in 14 months, Cora Bennett did not wake up in the night because she was afraid. The man came at 9:30 the next morning. Cora had been up since dawn. She'd boiled water, washed her face at the kitchen sink, found tea in the pantry tin, and was halfway through her second cup when she heard the engine in the drive. She set the cup down. Theo, who'd been sketching the dining room ceiling on a notebook page, looked up. "Mom." "I hear it." She went to the front door and opened it before he'd finished climbing out of the car. He was in his 50s, tall and well-dressed in a particular way that Vermont developers dressed when they wanted to look like locals. Flannel shirt under a wool overcoat, expensive boots that had never been muddy. He smiled the moment he saw her, and the smile did not touch his eyes. Mrs. Bennett. It wasn't a question. That depends, she said. He laughed, polite and rehearsed. I'd heard the property had transferred. I thought I'd come up and welcome you to the Ridge. My name is Theodore Vance. I own a development firm down in Brattleboro. Vance Properties. I've had an interest in this house for some years now. That's so. I have, in fact, made offers on it 3 separate times, going back to 1998. Mrs. Whitman wasn't interested in selling, of course. He waved his hand, dismissing 25 years of rejection like it was a fly. Different generation. Sentimental. I respected that. But now, he looked past her into the house, just for a moment. Now, perhaps things can be different. I'd like to make you an offer, Mrs. Bennett. A serious one. I've come prepared. He held up a leather portfolio. Cora did not invite him in. It's awful early to be making offers, Mr. Vance. I haven't even unpacked. And I respect that, ma'am. But I also know, please don't take this the wrong way, that you're in a difficult situation. Mr. Marsh is a good lawyer, but he isn't a financial advisor. He won't know how to help you turn an inheritance like this into actual money. The taxes alone on a property of this size will eat you alive. The maintenance will be impossible without significant capital. You'll be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next decade just to keep the roof on, and that's before any improvements. I haven't asked you for any advice, Mr. Vance. $80,000, he said. Cash. Today. The deed is a clean transfer. We close by Friday. She had been ready for an offer. She hadn't been ready for the number to fall out of his mouth like that. Fast and clean, before she'd had her second cup of tea. $80,000. It was, she calculated almost involuntarily, for years of rent, 2 reliable cars. Theo's college, if he was careful. A start, a real, actual, undeniable start. She held her face still. That's a lot of money for a house you called sentimental. The land, Vance said, smooth as cream. The acreage is what matters. The house is going to come down. I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Bennett. The house is a teardown. The land is the asset. MHM, you don't have to decide today, but I would encourage you not to wait too long. Properties like this, older properties with histories, sometimes attract complications. There can be unexpected issues, title difficulties, disputes from distant relatives who didn't know about the original will. It would be a shame for you to miss this offer because you waited a week and someone with a worse motive showed up. There it was, the thing under the smile. Cora stepped out onto the porch. The cold was sharp on her face, but she didn't pull her coat tighter. She didn't want to look like she was bracing. Mr. Vance, I appreciate you coming up here. I do. I'd like a few days to think. Of course. He produced a card from somewhere inside the wool coat. Anytime, day or night. I mean that. He started down the steps, then stopped and turned back. Mrs. Bennett, one more thing. I don't know what's in that east wing. I've heard rumors over the years, most of them not worth repeating. But Estelle Whitman was an unusual woman. There are people in this town who would tell you she was sick. Mentally, toward the end. Anyway, whatever's behind that boarded door, you might find it kindred to yourself and to your son not to look. Some doors are sealed for a reason. He smiled, tipped an imaginary hat, and went to his car. Cora watched him drive away. She did not go back inside until the sound of his engine had been gone from the road for 2 full minutes. Theo was standing in the entryway when she came back in. "Mom," he said, "he doesn't want the land." "I know. He wants what's behind the door." "I know, baby." She walked to the parlor. She stood in front of the bolted door. She put her hand flat against the cool wood. The bolts had been driven from this side. Estelle had sealed the wing herself. She wanted to keep something out, or, Cora thought now more carefully, to keep something in, to keep something waiting. "Theo," she said, Get the toolbox from the kitchen. Word traveled fast in the kind of town where people had nothing to do all winter but watch. By the time Cora and Theo walked into Hadley's general store the next afternoon, Wendell's car, which he had insisted on lending her, parked across the street. Half the people in Hadley County already knew that someone had moved into the Whitman house. The other half found out within the hour. The look started in the parking lot. They followed her down the dry goods aisle. A woman near the canned vegetables turned her cart around when Cora and Theo came around end the row. A man at the register stared so long his coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. Cora ignored it. She had a list: bread, butter, eggs, oatmeal, milk, the cheap kind of laundry soap. She moved through the store the way she had learned to move through stores. Head up, eyes forward, not letting the staring change her steps. At the register, the cashier, a heavy woman in her 60s with a name tag that read Ruth, rang up her items without speaking. When the total came, Cora set down the cash Wendell had advanced her, and Ruth took it without making eye contact. Then, just as Cora was reaching for the bag, Ruth said, without looking up, "Honey, you shouldn't stay there." Cora paused. "Excuse me, that house." Ruth still didn't look up. She was making change very carefully, as if it required all her attention. Estelle Whitman was a kind woman, but she wasn't right. Not in the head. Toward the end, she was, it doesn't matter. People talked. Children weren't allowed near. There were stories about that East Wing for years. You stay clear of it, hear me? You take whatever they offer you for that land, and you go. Cora took her change. "Thank you for the advice." "It's not advice," Ruth said. "It's a warning." The woman behind her in line, who had pretended not to listen, said too loudly to her companion, "Some people would inherit a mansion and think it made them somebody." The companion laughed. Cora picked up the bag. She did not turn around. She put one hand on Theo's shoulder, walked out of the store, and did not let her composure slip until she was in the driver's seat with the door closed. Then she let out a breath that came out shaped like something close to a sob, but not quite. "Mom, I'm okay. They're idiots. They're scared." She started the car. Different thing. That night, the second man came. Cora was at the kitchen sink, washing the dinner dishes by lamplight, when headlights swept across the kitchen window. Two of them. A truck, not a car. She set down the dish towel and walked to the front door. The man who climbed down from the cab was younger than Vance, maybe 40, and bigger, a build like a man who used to play football and had kept some of the muscle and most of the meanness. He wore a Carhartt jacket and work boots. He looked on the surface like a man who belonged in this town. Underneath that surface, Cora could already see something else. He didn't bother to knock. He stood at the foot of the porch steps with his hands on his hips. "You Cora Bennett?" "Who's asking?" "Marcus Whitman. I'm your half-brother." She felt the porch tilt very slightly under her feet. "My mother had no other children," she said. "Different mother." His voice was flat. "Same father. Your dad and mine. Robert Bennett. He had me with my mom in 1985, before he met your mother. Walked out on us when I was 4. I didn't know about you for years. Found out after Estelle died, and my lawyer got in touch. Estelle was my dad's aunt by marriage, too. See? So, technically this house," he gestured with his chin, "should have been split. Half to me, half to you. It wasn't. That's the problem." She kept her hand on the doorframe. She realized, about to be told the second part of the warning Vance had only sketched the first half of. "Mr. Whitman," she said carefully, "if you have a legal claim, you'll need to take it up with my attorney. I'm not going to discuss the will with you on my porch tonight. I'm not asking you to discuss it." He took a step up. He was big enough that even one step up brought him close to her face. "I'm telling you, the will's getting contested. Estelle wasn't a sound mind. Everyone in this town will testify to that. You're not going to win that fight, lady. You're a homeless woman who showed up out of nowhere with a paper. You think a judge is going to let you keep a multi-million-dollar property when there's a blood relative right here in Vermont who actually grew up here? Multi-million." His mouth tightened. He'd said it without meaning to. "Land value. The land's worth a lot. Take Vance's offer." Or take a worse one, when somebody figures out you can't afford to fight. Either way, you're not going to be living in this house come spring. He stared at her for another long moment. Then he turned, climbed back into his truck, and drove off into the dark. Cora stood on the porch until her hands had stopped shaking. When she came back inside, Theo was sitting on the parlor sofa with his arms wrapped around his knees, and his eyes were very bright in the firelight. "Mom." "It's okay, Theo. It's okay," he said multimillion. He did. Vance said the house was a teardown. "I know. They're lying." "They are, baby." She walked to the bolted door. She stood in front of it. She put both her hands against the wood. The toolbox sat at her feet, where she had left it that morning before she'd lost her nerve. "Mom." Theo had come up beside her. "Are you ready now?" She wasn't. But she wasn't going to be readier tomorrow than she was tonight. "Yes," she said. She picked up the wrench. The first bolt fought her for 10 minutes. The second fought her for 5. By the third, she had the rhythm of it. Brace, lean, turn, and the fourth came out so easily she almost stumbled backward. The bolts clattered into the toolbox. The door, freed at last, swung inward an inch on its own weight, like a thing exhaling. Cora stood there for a long moment with the wrench in her hand, and her breath fogging in the cold air that flowed out from the wing beyond. Then she lifted the lantern from the parlor mantel, took Theo's hand, and stepped through. The hallway on the other side was longer than she expected. The Whitman house had not looked from outside like a building that could hide an entire wing this size. But standing inside it now, she understood. The east wing was almost a separate house, a long hall with a high ceiling, doors on both sides, and at the far end, another door. That one was not bolted. That one had a brass plate set into the wood at eye height, and on the brass plate, for words had been engraved, for the children's sake. Cora's breath caught. "Mom." "I'm okay." She walked slowly down the hall. The first door she opened was a small dormitory. 6 beds in 2 neat rows, each with a folded quilt at the foot, each with a pillow plumped, each with a small wooden trunk at its base. The walls had been painted by hand. Stars on the ceiling. A row of tiny painted rabbits running along the baseboard. A mural of the forest with a little path that wound between the beds and disappeared behind a painted door at the back of the room. The dust was thick in here. No one had swept this room in decades. But the beds had been made, and the trunks had been closed, and the room had been left not abandoned but finished. The way you leave a kitchen at the end of a long day, with the dishes done, and the stove wiped and the light turned off. The second door opened onto another dormitory, smaller, for beds, younger children's beds, with rails along the sides, a rocking chair in the corner, a shelf of books with their titles facing out, all of them children's books, some of them older than Cora. The third door was a schoolroom, 6 small desks in 2 rows, a teacher's desk at the front, a chalkboard on which someone had once written, in a careful adult hand, "Miss Estelle is so proud of you. May 14th, 1991. The chalk had not been wiped away. Someone had simply turned out the lights and locked the door. The fourth door was a kitchen. A children's kitchen. The same as a regular kitchen, but smaller. The counters lower. The cups smaller. The chairs sized for legs that did not yet reach the floor. The fifth door was a music room. The sixth door was a sick room. 3 small beds. A locked cabinet of medicines. A rocking chair. A rocking horse, painted blue, painted by hand, with mane made of real horsehair stitched in by a careful hand. Cora's eyes had begun to fill, and she could not have said why, except that she could feel it. Feel it the way you feel a presence in a room before you turn to see who's there. "Mom," Theo whispered, "what is this place?" She didn't answer. She walked to the last door, the one with the brass plate, and she put her hand on it and pushed. It opened. The room beyond was not a children's room. It was an office. A library, almost. The walls lined with file cabinets and shelves, a desk in the center, a window draped in heavy cloth, a leather chair pulled out from the desk, as if its occupant had only stepped away for a moment. On the desk lay a single envelope. It was addressed, in the same fine, careful hand as everything else in the wing, to Cora. She picked it up. Her fingers had gone numb. She broke the seal. "If you are reading this, then you have crossed the threshold. and you are ready, there is no rush. Sit, read, take your time. The house is yours. The wing is yours. What you find here, you may keep, change, sell, or burn. That is your right, not mine, not anymore. But before you decide, I would ask you to read what I have left. Not because I am owed your time, because you are owed the truth. Begin with the cabinet marked 1948. Read in order. I will be with you in spirit, even if I cannot be there in person. The rest you will understand by the end. Yours always, with hope, with apology, and with love, Estelle. Cora set the letter down. She walked to the wall of file cabinets. The drawers were labeled in neat brass plates. 1948, 1949, 1950, all the way through to 1991. She pulled open the drawer marked 1948. Inside were files. Hundreds of them, each one neatly tabbed, each one a name, each one a child. And then she understood. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Theo brought a chair to the desk for her. She didn't realize he had until she felt it behind her knees and sat down because her legs had decided, without consulting her, that they were done holding her up. She read the first file. It was thin, just 3 pages. A child named Mary, age 6, brought to the wing on April 11, 1948, by a woman who had walked 17 miles in the snow with a girl on her back. Notes on the child's health when she arrived: malnourished, frostbite on 2 toes, unable to speak above a whisper. Notes on her recovery: slowly, slowly, slowly. A photograph clipped to the inside cover: a small girl with enormous dark eyes, sitting on a rocking horse in the sick room, her mouth not quite smiling but no longer afraid. A final entry, dated 9 months later. Mary placed a day with the Holcombs in St. Albans. They are good people. She held my hand at the door and would not let go for a long time. I told her she could come back any time. She said she would be all right. I believe her. The handwriting was Estelle's. Cora closed the file. She opened the second. A boy named Daniel, age 4, brought to the wing in June of 1948 by the night nurse at the county hospital, who had risked her job to do it. The third file, a girl named Anne, age 11, brought by her grandmother. The fourth, a boy named Samuel, age 2, brought by a woman who would not give her name and never came back. Cora read for an hour. She read until Theo brought her tea from the kitchen and sat on the floor beside her with his head against her knee. She read until the candle Estelle had left on the desk burned down to a stub, and Theo found another one in the drawer. She read until she had reached the year 1968 and the 73rd file, and there, on a small page of yellowed paper clipped to the top, was a name she had not been ready to see. Helen, age 8, brought by a woman named Joan. Helen will stay. Helen had been her mother's name. Cora opened the file with hands that did not feel like hers. Inside was a photograph. Her mother, at 8 years old, in a yellow cardigan that Cora did not recognize, sitting in the music room of the wing with a small violin in her lap. Her hair was darker than Cora remembered. Her eyes were her own. Cora pressed both her hands to her mouth. There were notes, pages of notes. Helen had come to the wing at 8 and stayed until she was 15. She had been taken from a household in Massachusetts that had been, in Estelle's careful words, not safe. The woman named Joan had been a friend of her mother's, a friend who had managed to get the child out one night with nothing but a coat and a small suitcase. Joan had brought her to the wing because Joan knew of Estelle the way the people who needed to know of her knew. Helen had stayed 7 years. She had learned to read in the schoolroom. She had learned the violin in the music room. She had grown into a young woman in the dormitory upstairs, the bigger one with the painted rabbits along the baseboard. When she had turned 15, she had told Estelle she wanted to leave. She had wanted to find work. She had wanted to start a life that did not depend on anyone ever again. Estelle had let her go. There was a final entry in the file, dated 30 years later, in a different ink, written in a hand that was older and more shaky. Helen Bennett, born Helen Walsh, raised here as Helen, died this morning of an illness she had been hiding for many months. I learned of it from the social services notice, which I had arranged years ago to receive. She left a daughter, Cora, age 11. The child has been placed in foster care in central Vermont. I will watch from a distance. I will not interfere unless I must. Helen would not have wanted me to take the child from a system she herself survived, but I will keep the wing ready. If the child ever needs a place to stand, the place will be standing. Cora put her face in her hands and wept. She wept for a long time. Theo did not try to comfort her. He sat with his head against her knee and his hand around her ankle, the way he had held her ankle as a small child when she was reading him stories on the couch. He understood, without being told, that some weeping has to be done before anything else can happen. He was 13. He had learned more in the last year than most grown men learn in a lifetime. When the weeping was done, Cora wiped her face with the back of her wrist and looked at her son. Theo, my mother lived here. I heard. She lived here, and Estelle saved her, and Estelle watched my whole life, and I never knew. I know, Mom. All those years I thought we had nobody. I know, Mom. She closed Helen's file very gently and put it back where it belonged. She read the rest over 3 days. She did not leave the wing. Theo brought her food and tea and clean blankets and lit fires in the small fireplace in the office. Wendell came twice, and she met him in the parlor, and she did not tell him yet what she had found because she didn't have the words yet. She told him only that the wing was opened, and she would explain when she was ready. He nodded and did not press. By the end of the 3rd day, she had read every file. 643 children, between 1948 and 1991, brought by relatives, neighbors, nurses, ministers, teachers, in one case by a sheriff's deputy who had risked his job. Almost all of them had come from situations the formal systems of the time could not or would not see. Most had stayed for months and gone on, placed quietly with families Estelle had vetted herself. A few had stayed for years. 3 had stayed until adulthood. 2 had grown up and become teachers in the wing themselves, in the years when the work had grown beyond what one woman could do alone. The wing had closed in 1991. The last entry in the last file said only, I am tired. I am alone. The world has changed, and there are now legitimate channels for some of this work. Channels which did not exist when I began. I am closing the wing because I no longer have the strength to run it as it deserves. I have set aside what is needed to keep the house standing, and I have set aside the rest for whoever comes next. If anyone comes, I hope someone comes. There were also financial records. Estelle had been the only daughter of a wealthy timber family. She had inherited everything in 1947, a year before the wing opened. She had spent her life converting the inheritance into something else, into beds and quilts and milk and tuition, and quiet placements for children who had come to her with nothing. But she had not spent all of it. There had been more than she could spend, even doing what she had done. The family had owned land, quietly across 3 counties. Mineral rights, timber rights, a trust established in 1962 that had grown untouched for 60 years. When Cora found the trust documents in the bottom drawer, she sat and stared at the figure at the bottom of the most recent statement for so long that Theo finally said, Mom, what does it say? She read it to him. His face went very pale, and then he laughed, and the laugh became a sound that was not quite a laugh, and he sat down on the floor next to the desk. Theo, she said, it's not real until I talk to Wendell. I don't trust it yet. Mom, he told us the house alone was multi-million. I know. And there's a trust. I know. Mom. She put her hand on his head. We're not going to do anything stupid with this. We're not going to let it change us. Do you understand? Mom, you're crying again. I know. She pulled him against her side, and they sat there for a while, the 2 of them, in the office of a woman who had watched Cora from a distance for 30 years and prepared, against the day Cora might need it, a place where Cora's life could begin again. The next morning, she called Wendell. I need you to come up here, she said, and I need you to bring everything you know about what's actually owned by this estate, because I don't think you've been told the half of it either. Wendell was on the porch in 2 hours. She walked him through the wing. He did not speak for a long time. He stood in the schoolroom with his hand against one of the small desks. He stood in the dormitory with the painted rabbits and read the chalkboard message, and did not turn around when his eyes filled, because he was a private man, and he did not want her to see, even though she had already seen. When they were back in the office, he sat in the chair across from the desk and exhaled. "Mrs. Bennett," he said quietly, "I have been Estelle's lawyer for 14 years. I drafted 3 revisions of her will. I administered her estate. I had no idea this existed. I had no idea any of this existed. Forgive me. I knew there was an east wing. I knew it was sealed. I did not know it was this. I know you didn't. And the trust one knew about. I did not know what it was for. It was for this. It was for whoever came next." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Mrs. Bennett, may I ask, what are you going to do?" She had not let herself think about it yet, not directly, but the moment he asked, she found that she had already known, and the part of herself that knew things before her mind had caught up. She found that she had known from the moment she had opened the file marked Helen, and understood that this place had once held her mother. She said, "I'm going to open it again." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said very simply, "Then we have work to do, because before any of that can happen, there are 2 men in this county who are going to try to take this from you, and we're going to have to stop them." Theodore Vance came back 6 days later, and he did not come alone. He brought Marcus Whitman. He brought a 3rd man in a gray suit who introduced himself as Cora Bennett, attorney for Mr. Whitman, and he brought a thick folder that he set on the parlor table with the air of a man laying down a winning hand. Wendell was there. Cora had asked him to be. They had spent the week preparing. "Mrs. Bennett," Vance said, "I want to begin by saying I have no personal animosity here. I think we all want a clean resolution. I believe we can reach one today, and I believe the offer I'm about to make is the most generous offer you'll ever see for this property, because, frankly, it's the last good faith offer that's going to come your way." Cora said nothing. "For $100,000, Vance said, "cash. We close Friday. The will contest filed by Mr. Whitman is dropped. You walk away with enough money to set yourself and your son up in a comfortable life anywhere in the country. Mr. Whitman receives a private settlement from me, separately, for his cooperation. You and he never have to see each other again. Everyone wins." Cora let the silence sit. Wendell, beside her, said, "Mr. Vance, before my client responds, I'd like to ask Mr. Brennan about the basis of the will contest." Brennan cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitman is a half-sibling to Mrs. Bennett through their mutual father. He is, by Vermont law, an heir of equal standing in cases where the decedent died intestate." Wendell interrupted gently. "Mrs. Whitman did not die intestate. She left a will. The will is 23 years old and was reviewed and revised 3 times. Mr. Whitman is not named in it because Mr. Whitman is not Estelle Whitman's heir. His relation to Mrs. Bennett is via their father. Estelle Whitman was a great-aunt by marriage to Mrs. Bennett's mother, Helen Bennett. Marcus Whitman has no blood or marital relation to Estelle Whitman whatsoever. The shared surname is coincidence." Brennan opened his mouth, closed it. Vance's face did not move, but something in his eyes did. Wendell continued, "Mr. Whitman, may I ask, did Mr. Vance contact you, or did you contact Mr. Vance?" "He contacted me," Marcus said, before Brennan could stop him. "And did Mr. Vance suggest a will contest, or did you?" "He did." "Marcus," Brennan hissed, "and did Mr. Vance offer you a settlement contingent on the contest succeeding?" "Yeah, 25,000, if I help pressure her to sell." The silence in the parlor was a thing you could touch. Vance stood up. "Mr. Marsh, this is—" "Sit down, Mr. Vance," Wendell said, without raising his voice. "Sit down, or I will have my client walk you to the door. And then I will draft a complaint to the Vermont Bar Association regarding Mr. Brennan, and a separate complaint to the State Real Estate Licensing Board regarding you. Sit down." Vance sat down. "Now," Wendell said, "let's talk about what this property actually is." He opened his own folder. Wendell laid it out page by page in his careful, unhurried voice. The deeds to the original 3,000 acres of Whitman family land, of which the house occupied only 47. The mineral and timber rights, never exercised, never sold. The trust intact, untouched, current value confirmed. The full inventory of the wing, which Wendell did not show them but which he described in general terms, the historical archive, the 4-decade record of children placed and protected, the documentation of a legitimate, quietly operated charitable refuge that had been ahead of its time. Vance went pale somewhere in the middle. He was not going pale at the trust. He was going pale at the wing. When Wendell finished, the room was very quiet. Marcus Whitman spoke first. He had not spoken since admitting his own role. He did not look at Vance. He looked at Cora. That place, he said. The wing. What was it? It was a refuge, Cora said. For children. For 73 women and their children, in particular. Before the laws caught up. Before the systems caught up. Estelle took them and when no one else would. 73. 73 women, yes, and 643 children. He stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "My mother used to talk about a place. I thought she was making it up. She used to tell me, when I was little, about a house in the woods where she'd been safe for a few months when she was pregnant with me. She told me it was before things got bad. She said there was a woman there who fed her tea every night and who told her she could stay as long as she needed. She said she left because she thought my father had changed. She'd gone back to him because she thought he'd changed." Cora said nothing. Marcus Whitman put his face in his hands. "It was here," he said, "wasn't it?" Cora did not have to look. She had read every file. She remembered, because she had read them all. The file marked Diane, age 22, 6 months pregnant, brought herself, March 1985. She remembered the entry where Estelle had written, "Diane left this morning. She is going back. She believes he will be different. I told her she could come back any time. I am not sure she will. May God watch her." She said, "Yes, she was here in 1985 for 10 weeks. Estelle wrote about her. Your mother was a brave woman." Marcus Whitman wept. Then he wept the way men weep who've been told all their lives that their mother was not brave, that their mother was a quitter, that their mother had run out on them, that their mother had been weak, when in fact their mother had once tried to save them, and had been told later that the trying did not count. Cora let him weep. She did not look away. When he was done, he wiped his face on his sleeve and said, "I'm dropping the contest. Tonight, I, Mrs. Bennett. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.